Can't we solve global warming with renewables? But aren't solar and wind growing rapidly? Isn't the real problem that we simply consume too much energy? Isn't that why we need to control population growth? Scientists are already predicting an 8-degree rise in temperature by the end of the century. But it's much worse than that. If you believe the third world has a moral right to first world energy, then carbon emission is going to turn the Earth into a 24/7 pizza oven. The podcast will prove that popular solutions are not up to the challenge. Unplugging chargers and taking shorter showers are not the answer. Not wind or solar either. Find out why on Emit Phillips' American Pragmatist.
Ignoring all of the remedies, believing all of the rumors, with their endless database. I wanna sit with my enemies and say we should have done this sooner, while I look them in the face. Maybe that would crack the case.
Emit Phillips, American Pragmatist, here in Arkansas with my neighbor, Jamie Brandt, and he's got some questions regarding nuclear energy. Go ahead, Jamie.
Amir, do we really need nuclear in order to deal with global warming?
Well, okay, let's assume that the warming of the planet Earth, which scientists say is overwhelmingly caused by human emissions of greenhouse gases, nuclear energy is the most credible option we've got amongst current technologies. So, yeah.
Can you quantify a bit the task at hand?
The task at hand is huge. I mean, to reach the target temperature of Earth, we need to cut our carbon emissions by about 80% over the next 40 years. And this is critical now, And accomplish this while at the same time, global energy, I believe, demand is going to rise double or triple versus today.
Oh, I didn't know about the doubling or the tripling.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before, which makes this seem even more unreachable.
Well, yeah, definitely. On our current trajectory, we're guaranteed to fail, and given the double or tripling, we're guaranteed to fail in a very spectacular, apocalyptic way. But look, accomplishing this is going to require we produce vast amounts of new energy, and it's got to be zero carbon energy. And at present, in my opinion, firm opinion, the only way we know how to do that is with nuclear energy.
It doesn't seem like creating more energy is a good idea. Isn't the real problem that we already consume too much energy?
Look, walking and riding your bike instead of driving a car isn't going to solve the problem. I know it's counterintuitive, but saving energy while nice and helpful is not enough. And yeah, I admit it's counterintuitive, but the fact remains most people on the planet need more energy, not less.
Why?
Because socioeconomically, energy consumption is highly correlated with better health incomes for people. They're going to live longer with more energy and higher standard of living. First world countries have more energy, and they have all these things. They live longer, better health, higher standard of living. High energy societies, first world countries, have liberated billions of people from lives of hard agricultural labor as opposed to second and third world countries. The only viable way to truly help the poor, assuming you really care about the poor, is with a hell of a lot more energy.
Okay, so we need a lot more energy unless we're willing to say the poor don't deserve the energy that we use.
I mean, if you're willing to say that, then this is a whole different podcast. There's a different debate here, but assuming you really care about the poor, precisely. More than a billion people around the globe, they still don't have electricity. They don't have access to electricity at all. Zero, zilch. So, it's huge.
Okay, and it gets worse. We just discovered that you want us to double or even triple our creation of energy, and we're these evil elitists now all of a sudden too, right?
Well, if you don't give them the energy, the poor in second and third world countries in India and China can certainly argue you're evil elitists by you getting all the electricity, by ruining the environment 100 years ago, and now they don't have access to it. That doesn't seem fundamentally fair to them. I can see where they can make that argument. although I'm no fan of Communist China. I think they have some ground there. But at the end of the day, the basic math of global development, which we've been alluding to in global warming, is unforgiving. Unforgiving. If we're going to meet the needs of a growing global population while keeping global warming in check, we need technologies that can produce enormous amounts of energy without emitting carbon. That's the task.
Some people are proposing that we try to control the population growth. Would that help?
Yeah, that Malthus economic viewpoint. No, it's the wrong way to go. Look at China, one child policy. Governments like Communist China controlling overtly, trying to curb population growth has always led to the extirpation, the culling, the curtailing of liberty. And Jamie, I know you're a fair weather libertarian, so you got to be on board with me on this. You got to be on board.
No, I'm not a fan of communist China and one child per family, which I know has changed some recently. But
for me, communism is code for super crappies. Communism, I'm enough of a libertarian to believe in liberty. That's a no-no. It's a no-no.
I agree there for sure.
So let's go back to solving the problem. This is a pragmatist show. We got to solve the problem.
Okay.
Providing universal access to abundant, cheap, clean energy is the best. Listen to qualify. One of the best population growth strategies we have, bar none.
Because when they have more energy, they're able to be healthier. They probably can get wealthier. They can live longer lives, and that, I guess, people living longer and being happier, maybe that controls the population.
Of course, man. Look at your own life. Richer people have less kids. Poor people have more. As people become wealthier, every study shows they're more economically secure. They have fewer children. They want the kids to go farther. Women like shopping more than raising kids, and this is why leading advocates, for human development and environmental sustainability, like Bill Gates and Jeffrey Sachs, they strongly support the development of nuclear energy across the board, and it's usually not said. Bill Gates is a big fan of nuclear energy.
Are you concerned at all if we create all this extra energy that is bad for the environment?
Okay. Nuclear is carbon free, so let's take a step back. Cheap, I did say that too. Cheap, clean energy allows us to reduce our impact on the environment, so we got to focus on that. And with cheap, clean energy, you can grow more food on less land and leave more wilderness for nature. We can reprocess wastewater and desalinate seawater rather than depleting aquifers and draining our majestic rivers like the Mississippi River. And you can also recycle fiber and pulp rather than cutting down ancient forests or Amazon forests. So to get to the core here, a world with abundant, clean, cheap energy lets us protect natural resources and leave more of our ecological inheritance undisturbed. So,
can we become more energy efficient instead of using more energy?
Look, energy efficiency is a good thing. I'm not against energy efficiency, but we are vastly more energy efficient than we were a few decades ago, much less than a few centuries ago. Yet even as we become more energy efficient, we've also continued to use more energy. It's not solving the structural problem.
That's because energy efficiency makes energy cheaper.
Yeah. And the result is that we find more ways to use cheaper energy. So the more efficient it is, the more supply. The more supply, the lower the price. So we use it more. It's a vicious cycle going in reverse. So
energy efficiency means we use energy more because it's cheaper.
Yeah, look, just a few years ago, nobody heard of the cloud, and 2 decades ago, nobody heard of the internet. Today, most of us, more than ever, are able to fly around the world. We fill our houses with 50-inch TVs and all manner of network devices. More energy efficiency didn't stop this from happening. We transformed billboards and skyscrapers into gigantic LED video screens. Efficiency is good. It didn't stop the aforementioned, and we should strive for more energy and more efficiency, but it won't eliminate the need to develop enormous, and I do mean enormous, quantities of cheap and zero carbon energy to meet the demands of the global demand that's coming, especially in second and third world countries like India, China, and Brazil, for example.
So it's sort of like we need to add more lanes on the superhighway.
Look, I was in California for 24 years. You add a lane to the 405, everyone says, oh my God, you add a lane to the 405, let's all get on the highway. And then at the end of the day, traffic's the same. People just drive more. Another lane, less traffic, let's take a spin. Everyone's thinking the same thing. End game, pretty much zero. We need something that takes us to an entirely different level, and we need it quick. It's got to be structural, which is why we need government help to do it.
Well, they're saying that the answer is renewables, and that'll take us to another level. Is that fair?
Well, okay, it's a fair point you brought up, but we've made a lot of progress with renewables, but they're still costly, intermittent, and difficult to scale. Without utility scale energy storage technologies like batteries to store all that energy from wind and solar, it's not viable right now. And you can't run a modern society on wind and solar alone. Germany can't do it because there's no sun in the winter, period. So,
yeah.
you know, at the end of the day, renewables like wind and solar, you need actual wind and the sun to work. So unless you're Thor, the Greek god of the sun, Apollo, you know, you're going to be dependent on wind and rain. Wind and solar, and it sucks. Look at, come back to Germany again and Denmark. They have achieved higher levels of wind and solar than about anybody, but they've done so through heavy, historically unprecedented developmental subsidies from the government that can't be sustained. Let me say it again, it can't be sustained. And even more so, Germany remains overwhelmingly dependent on fossil energy, specifically Russian fossil energy. More specifically, Germany got 70% of its electricity from fossil fuels in 2012 versus at just 5% from solar, 7% from wind. I mean, come on, get a perspective. And they're dependent on Russia. Look at the Russian-Ukraine war. There's more here. Wind and solar haven't solved big problems, period.
Okay, but I understand you're saying that it's not sustainable because of the cost, but what about the cost of nuclear? Isn't that even a bigger problem? It's more expensive.
All right. Okay. Look, wind and solar increases a little bit. You know, it's like going from 0 to 1 to infinity, or 1 to 2 in pennies, 100% rate of return. The fact remains, solar generated just 0.18% of electricity in the U.S., wind 3.5% in 2012 in this country. This was after more than $50 billion in renewable electricity subsidies over the past 3 decades. So Germany, coming back to Germany again, since 2000 has committed over $130 billion to solar energy in the form of above market price 20-year in tariff contracts. And at the end of the day, they only get 5% of annual electricity from solar. So it's not what it's cracked out to be in terms of cost. Okay. Now you said nuclear is expensive. Okay, I just want to show how expensive wind and solar is. Now back to nuclear.
Yeah.
Installed nuclear generation in this country is among the cheapest sources of energy we have, cheaper than even coal, okay? Now I'm switching to France. France generates over 80% of its electricity with nuclear energy and has some of the cheapest electricity prices in Western Europe. So I'm coming back with you to a bunch of different countries, Western Europe countries.
No, I've also heard that about France, so I'd say that's right.
This is the first time we're ever going to follow France in anything. They've done a good job. I'd say France and Sweden have done a phenomenal job, and admittedly Russians and South Korea, we'll get to that.
Okay, but I do know nuclear power plants, they're just too expensive to build.
But they operate for 60 to 80 years. Get the full picture, Jamie. You know, they produce massive amounts of energy with virtually no food costs over a long period of time. Over the long term, Jamie, you're looking at initial costs. I'm looking at long-term costs. They're a bargain. They're a bargain in the long term. They do admittedly have a high initial cost. You gotta look at the entire cost cycle and not just the initial investment, which is your misfocus. It's like dating a woman. You invest in everything to get them, then you coast and watch TV, listen to podcasts like this one, and when you look back at your life, it was kind of a bargain, something like that. So,
I appreciate the relationship advice.
Yeah.
Do you have any other evidence, though, to your assertion?
Okay. I've used a bunch of countries. I'm going to go here to Finland. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but the Olkiluoto 3 nuclear power plant in Finland, that's the poster child of expensive nuclear reactors they use against nuclear energy, is $6.5 billion over budget and 6 years behind schedule. Here's the kicker. Even so, recent analysis studies show that this beleaguered nuclear power plant in Finland will produce electricity at almost 1/4 the cost of Germany's solar program. Okay?
Okay, yeah, but you're the one with the doctorate, and I have to kind of trust you because you can manipulate these facts for me. I'm going to believe you, but is that a fair comparison?
Okay, all right. Well, I am in higher ed. I teach economics at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. You know, I can see why you're leery. But, okay, fair enough. But these are good technology to compare. I am comparing apples to apples. As the Finnish plant is a first of its kind design, specifically in Ariva EPR. EPR is a third generation pressurized water reactor design, which is significantly safer, more reliable, and more efficient than most existing nuclear power plants. Later builds, successive builds, such as the second EPR under construction in France, are expected to be cheaper as well. But even if this extreme case, okay, isn't unreasonably expensive when compared to another innovative carbon-free electricity source like solar PV, nuclear, at the end of the day, is still much cheaper than solar, and solar is generally getting massive government subsidies to seem much more viable than it is under current technologies, and it's just that simple.
Okay, to summarize your point, you're saying that there's a huge upfront cost in the investment to produce the large amount of clean power for 60 years or more. But you're saying it's several times what we would get from like wind or solar.
Yeah, because you look at the whole life cycle. Good. Thank you for listening. You look at the whole life cycle, not just the initial cost.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep.
So, I mean, look, environmentalists, and I'm thinking of Greenpeace here, who oppose nuclear power demand short-term profitability without subsidies, but make no such demand on renewables like wind and solar. And this is extremely hypocritical by them, in my opinion. And a lot of the media is engaged in the same kind of crapola, in my opinion. So,
yeah.
But to answer your simplistic binary question, real simple, no. And wind and solar aren't either, they're not viable either without massive government subsidies. So be fair, compare apples to apples.
As a business person, I'm looking for the long term, and it sounds like it's a better deal. It's cheaper overall. Let me ask you this: can you name other places besides France and Finland? Can you name some other countries that are doing this?
Well, okay. Your argument that nuclear power these days is so expensive, except for France and Finland. Okay, other places. I'm thinking off the top of my head here. South Korea, Russia, and the Urals, fourth generation, where they're using nuclear waste. Probably nuclear waste is part of the fuel. Awesome. And Sweden. So in Finland, I forgot which one. So there's some other countries there.
Okay, you said Sweden and South Korea. They're very different countries. Well, even Russia. They're very different than us. Can you walk me through a realistic scenario where the United States could be building these sufficient reactors at a reasonable price?
Okay, I'm starting with the mission. To be clear, nuclear power does not compete with cheap German coal or U.S. methane fracking, but it can be cheaper than most renewables without their government subsidies. Let me go to South Korea. 2013, nuclear power generated electricity at 3.7 cents per kilowatt, cheaper than coal, 5.6 cents, hydro at 16.2 cents. In the U.S., national average electricity rate per kilowatt hour, 10.43 cents.
Wow.
So, I mean, that gives you, I'm just trying to give you some parameters and perspective here.
Wow, the United States, 10.43
cents.
South Korea,
3.7
cents. Okay, well, and so South Korea delivers nuclear generated electricity.
I mean, they're awesome. South Korea is currently delivering that. The average doesn't take into account the high initial cost, which we alluded to. So average cost for nuclear generated electricity tends to keep trending downward due to the high initial cost, which you've alluded to many times now, and the subsequent low operational costs. That's critical.
So securing large capital expenditures at the start of a long-term project, such as a nuclear power plant, would not come easily in a deregulated private marketplace, especially when the prices of competing fossil fuels are
dead on. What venture capital is going to invest all this billions of dollars up front when the market of coal and gas is hot volatile? So exactly, getting a ton of upfront money when competing against the volatility prices of coal and gas, fracking and all, extremely difficult. You get the money, and then for some reason, totally out of your control, the price of oil and gas, fracking, the president kills fracking, President Biden, falls globally, and suddenly investors are looking like you're a malicious thief and an idiot. That's why you need the federal government to give some guarantees. You got to get them involved.
Yeah, and this is why you're calling for the federal government to guarantee the initial cost to avoid the losing funding in the midstream.
Yeah, and I know it sounds like Keynesian economics, you're libertarian, and they against Keynes, but that's okay. Keynesian economics coming to the rescue here in a sense. You need the government help. You don't start a nuclear reactor unless you're going to finish it. That seems reasonable. Don't waste the people's money, tax money. Otherwise, the venture just becomes another loss leader for the renewable, frenzied media to feed upon, and it's not fair. You're not comparing apples to apples.
Either way, it sounds like you're saying the government is needed in the beginning to get the thing launched.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would, yes, big time. The federal government has to get involved here. They're part of the solution. Nuclear would need, a lot less. And need, the initial build. It can't be like the other renewables, wind and solar. You need huge government subsidies because of the initial upfront cost. Renewables get huge government subsidies because of the initial cost and the huge operational cost. The operational cost on renewables is volatile and huge. Nobody cares about that.
You're calling for like huge infrastructure, like more like what we did with the railroads, not like adding a pump at the gas station. We're talking about like big government, building these projects for us so that the market can be stable.
Absolutely correct, but it can be done. Let's go to South Korea. South Korea generates cheap electricity because with repeated bills, economies of scale, like the railroad, which is a good analogy, It can construct a nuclear power plant for about $2 billion per gigawatt, which is freaking awesome. In the United Kingdom, unfortunately, it's $8 billion per gigawatt. In the U.S., because of the lawsuits, a lot of it, it's about $12 billion. So we're out of a good price range there. We're out of the sweet spot.
But you're arguing that this does not mean nuclear power is not economical, but rather that Britain and the United States should start to do what South Korea did and build successive plants of the same design with government backing for the long-term
successive
investment.
plants is right, because you get better at it when you do it more. It's your railroad analogy. Stick with it. It's a good example.
Yeah.
And so, okay, recent study here, going scholastic on you for a second. Recent study of cost drivers in nuclear plant construction around the world. It emphasized efforts to capture learning during the build-out of a fleet, many nuclear reactors, and completion of designs prior to the start of construction. Know what you're getting into, build 100 of them.
Yeah, nail down as much as you can in the beginning. Like the Model T, a bunch of them factory style.
Dead on the money.
Yeah.
Dead on the money. Another good example, Model T, pump them out, you know. And so, if you don't do this, the planet is we're in deep trouble. I don't know how else to word it, but yeah, the Model T example's right.
Okay, now I'm worried about the lawsuits. Are you worried about that at all? The protective.
Well, we got to have the government coming together.
Yeah,
I'm confident. Let's go back to money real quick. You could build nuclear power plants. I'm going to say this, for $1 billion per plant. We commit to building 100. Give an economy of scale, and no hurricane of lawsuits, to come to your point now, from Greenpeace, that's what I'm thinking of, to drive up costs unnecessarily. The federal government, it's real specific, that's all the problem here, should offer legal immunity to the venture of 100 nuclear power plants in terms of national security. Justified national security.
Okay. If you're thinking that they're cheap theoretically, why aren't we doing it?
Well, you got to get the private and public sector to play ball here together, and they seldom do. The government's got to come in, and if they don't play together, we're gonna be cooked. But I think right now it's the uncertainty of the coal and fracking gas prices globally, and the plethora of lawsuits, that especially in the United States and England, have gummied up the works here. So, we might have to look at how other countries have handled it.
Yeah. Okay, I understand.
Like for example, look, if you go, this is communist China. You think you can sue communist China for a nuclear power plant, or in India? Hell no. And I hate to say we got to act like communist China, but in this regard, maybe we do. China and India and other developing countries, they see the need to keep up with the massive growth in energy demand, and they are developing and doing what I'm talking about here, unlike us, and we're falling behind as usual.
I just want to highlight that you just said we need to do something that China is doing.
Okay, fair enough. But why? Because China, with their central planning, which I'm generally against, because I'm pro-market, but it reduces uncertainty, because you can't sue the Chinese government if they're building a nuclear power plant. And reducing uncertainty, it brings in the venture capital. It's more likely to be public and private together. Uncertainty goes down about how fast energy demand is going to rise in other countries. More commitment to build 100 nuclear power plants. I'm talking 100 here.
Okay, so this is not a new idea. We've already tried this. The United States did this before. I'm wondering, why did we turn away from the nuclear?
Well, 3 Mile Island was a biggie, but it is sneakily coming back. I think one thing President Obama did that was good, he approved loan guarantees for 2 new nuclear reactors in Georgia and the other one in South Carolina, and development funding, for new reactor designs that are smaller and cheaper to build. So Obama maybe sneakily got the thing going there. And
Okay, so it's not a complete loss then.
No, but we're overall we're doing a pretty crappy job. So we're getting an F on this at a national level, and I wish President Trump had focused on this. And I think this is a bipartisan issue, and I think Republicans and Democrats have both missed the boat here by not focusing on nuclear, and 100 of them. And this is a real infrastructure plan. So we need to go further and faster.
I wanted to ask this question. So we couldn't ably predict how much energy would continue to spike up, given that we already consume a ton of energy, and uncoupled by the high upfront costs. Was it perceived as too much of a financial risk?
Well, what happened when it came out of nowhere is the shale gas revolution. It dramatically lowered the price of gas in the U.S., and it was made possible thanks to 3 decades of public investment in better drilling technologies. But it made comparatively nuclear reactors not a good buy, not a good bargain. All of a sudden, nuclear reactors with cheap gas look costly, too costly, inefficient, not a good proposition for venture capital, taking a risk on it, right? You need the government to come in and make guarantees, make a commitment to building 100. That would take that argument away you're alluding to.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So, but you still got to deal with the lawsuits and insurance and issues like that.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly.
Now, I do want to say on the insurance side, this is where they came up with the Price-Anderson Act to help with that. And nuclear is among a lot of activities and circumstances while we do have liability limits. And it's not just nuclear. We as a society give liability limits from lawsuits, plane crashes, oil spills, product liability, medical malpractice, capped $250,000, $500,000. So you got to add the biggest renewable project ever too, hydroelectric dams. They have limited liability and they're all capped. They're capped.
Explain the caps. Why the caps?
You can't get more money than a certain amount. They may be capped at $500,000, $250,000. And societies oftentimes cap or socialize liabilities for events when costs are difficult to predict, quantify, and where apportioning responsibility is hard to apportion. It's hard to say who did what's wrong. You got a highly uncertain event. That's when you want to bring, socialize the cost with caps.
So if they're allowing a cap, then that means that the insurance is affordable.
No, unfortunately it's not. It helps, but even with limited liability caps, nuclear operators still got to buy an enormous amount of liability insurance, and that's why I said the government's got to get involved more so. And the risk is pooled right now with current pooled insurance for the U.S. nuclear industry. It amounts to they're paying about $12.6 billion a year, and that should get down to about $1 billion. We could build 6-8 more nuclear power plants.
Okay, so you addressed my concerns about the insurance and the overall cost in general, but now we have to deal with the elephant in the room, which is the meltdowns.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Meltdowns, admittedly, very serious industrial accident. Not going to play it down. Extremely expensive to clean up, and they can result in radiation exposure, create serious health risks. But context, those risks need to be put into context. Okay, compared to virtually all of the forms of energy production and generation, nuclear energy is remarkably safe, not perfect, remarkably safe. The most comprehensive peer-reviewed studies done by independent scientists evaluating air pollution, worker safety, and all other risks in energy production, they found that nuclear is safer than coal production, oil, natural gas, and even solar.
You're going to have to defend that statement. How do you prove that?
Okay. All right, let's get specific. More than 500 people die every year from accidents in coal, oil, and gas industries in Europe alone. It was a European study. Globally, more than 170,000 people die annually from respiratory ailments associated with burning coal, specifically in China.
COVID.
Well, yeah, we don't even get into COVID. Just the nuclear, just the coal, and China burns an ugly part of coal,
Yeah, okay.
So I'm telling you, nuclear can beat solar. When we think of solar energy as the cleanest, safest of all energy technologies, no, wrong. Manufacturing solar panels is actually extremely toxic process, releases all sorts of pollutants harmful to human health. Moreover, installing solar panels involves two of the riskiest occupations. What are they? Roofing and electrical work. Calculations from studies, drawing on roofing mortality data and solar installation data suggest approximately 2 deaths per terawatt hour in the solar PV industry just from roofing falls. And then to contrast this, nuclear power results in 0.05 deaths per terawatt due to all causes, including meltdowns, Jamie, including meltdowns.
Right.
So I'm addressing your point.
And yet, I don't have nightmares about falling off a roof or a solar panel hitting me or something like that. And yet, I've seen numerous documentaries.
I know,
about
Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima.
Yes,
okay, fine.
kill us.
No argument. All right, they do stand on the head. 60 years of operating nuclear power plants. There have been 3 serious accidents. That's it. 3 Mile Island, though, resulted in no deaths. Okay, this is Chernobyl. But 3 Mile, no observable health problems with 3 Mile Island. Okay, now Chernobyl. Everyone's big on Chernobyl. According to comprehensive reports from the United Nations and the World Health Organization, Chernobyl, which was a great movie, by the way, resulted in 27 confirmed deaths of workers and firefighters who were exposed to high doses of radiation during the accident, and will cause, according to the study, an estimated 4,000 premature deaths from cancer over the lifetimes of those exposed.
That's not nothing.
I know, okay, it's not nothing. But here's a counter-argument to that. No observable increase in cancer deaths thus far in the affected area.
So they figured it out. They stopped it.
Apparently,
Well, what about the more recent one, the
Fukushima. Okay, let's go to Fukushima. Although commonly perceived, Fukushima is very different than the common perception. How so? the health risks from the Fukushima reactors, even when employing the most conservative analysis possible, the deaths were so low that in retrospect, the optimal response would have been no evacuation at all. I think the evacuation was overdone. In hindsight, I know it's hard to do it in the moment. In hindsight, but let's go to the deaths. Let's go to the bottom line. You're big on the deaths.
Well, how did they die then?
Okay. No one was killed during the Fukushima accident due to radiation exposure. Yes, don't call me a liar. Yes, no one died. No one died. And the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation expects the long-term effect on the surrounding public to be extremely low, with estimates ranging from a high of 180 to as low as 0 additional cancers in Japan, where 352,000 people died of cancer in 2010. So in other words, additional cancer deaths will be so few as to be impossible to distinguish from the more than 30% of the population that ultimately dies of cancer. So
okay, so am I just an idiot, or I have a bad memory, or like where are all the deaths? I thought there were like all these people that died.
There were. Okay, let me quantify it a little more. There was a tragic loss of lives from Japan, no argument, but it wasn't from the nuclear meltdown. Let's break it down. The earthquake and tsunami themselves killed about 18,000 people, which is a ton. Injured a lot more and caused hundreds of billions of dollars of damage. I mean, the bottom line is it was the largest earthquake in recorded history in Japan and the third largest on planet Earth ever worldwide. So we don't want to belittle that. So it was huge.
Okay, so the earthquake's to blame, not the nuclear plant.
I mean, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, look, 5 years, step back. 5 years later, the trauma of this epic disaster is all but lost in the world's collective memory. Okay, the discussion always focuses not on the 18,000 dead, unfortunately, but on the nuclear disaster, and you're guilty of this.
Yeah.
And the truth, at the end of the day, look, Jamie, there was no nuclear disaster in Fukushima. There was a natural disaster of biblical proportions, a small consequence of which was very expensive. It did. And an expensive, disruptive, but not lethal industrial accident at Fukushima nuclear power plant, followed by an unnecessary and botched evacuation.
Okay, so you're saying that they shouldn't have evacuated at all?
That's exactly what I'm saying. The unnecessary evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people, I believe, may have caused about 50 deaths among patients moved from hospitals, for example.
So all the deaths?
Well, many. Okay, look.
90%?
It's hard to quantify all this stuff, but I mean, you got the stress going on here, people being moved from hospitals. I'm from New Orleans. I remember Katrina. People died from leaving Katrina. I don't know, more people died from the evacuation of the Katrina itself, but I mean, evacuation has a cost, okay? And it's hard to know how many critically ill patients would have died absent the evacuation and all. But at the end of the day, mortality rates returned to normal in Fukushima, returned to normal after about a year, although more than 100,000 evacuees remained. They were still evacuated.
But is there a silver lining in the fact that the awareness was raised, nuclear?
No, Jamie, there was no silver lining. No, there was no silver lining at all. What happened next sucked. What happened next killed thousands of people. Specifically, Japan and Germany panicked, and there's no better word for it, about nuclear power and shut down perfectly good, safe nuclear power plants. Big mistake. Worse still, no silver lining here, Jamie. Japan closed 54 nuclear reactors and Germany 8 more. Almost all remain closed to this day. These were inevitably replaced mostly with fossil fuels. That, including a lot of coal. And those fossil fuels pollute the air with their toxins, increasing cancer, emphysema in the population. So, although an exact estimate, real difficult to make, the deaths from the switch from nuclear to fossil fuels here was certainly in the thousands each year. And and over the last 10 years since the accident, you got a lot of deaths. They should stick with nuclear.
So maybe what we learned was a better plan for dealing with natural disasters and not evacuating everybody. I'm curious, like at the end of the day though, after the dust cleared, what was the final breakdown of the
this is where the media is so anti-nuclear. I do think they're biased structurally. And you got to get into counting, you got to be honest. And the counting that you're alluded to is the accounting for the toll of the 2011 tsunami disaster killed 18,000 people. Nuclear power disaster, nobody. Botched evacuation, maybe on the order of 1,000 killed. Slow motion disaster of replacing clean nuclear power with dirty fuels, fossil fuels. I would say more than 10,000 killed. Radiation rarely kills anyone. Fear of radiation killed tens of thousands here, Jamie. Fear of radiation, which you're guilty of too.
maybe I shouldn't point this out, but you mentioned media bias. Like, what would the agenda be to stop nuclear power as an industry so they can promote?
I don't know. They just seem so structurally over on solar and wind. Except China. Here we go. China, India. In the U.S., several Middle Eastern countries, they stopped their nuclear power for safety review after Fukushima. Maybe that's justified. But since then, all have gone forward with planned nuclear power construction. Although, Japan shut down 54 of its nuclear power plants immediately after the earthquake. Now they're seriously reconsidering the new no nuclear power plant thing. So,
so
I just want to throw that in. Yeah.
In some countries, it's affected sort of the renaissance of nuclear power, but not everywhere, obviously. What's the long-term fallout?
Well, let me go back to Germany. Germany did accelerate its nuclear phase-out of Fukushima. But, this has been going on away since 2000 in Germany. Not a single country, though, canceled a new nuclear power plant in response to Fukushima. In fact, several countries like United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Jordan, they're currently right now moving forward plans to build their first commercial nuclear power plant. So I'm going to say the nuclear renaissance, Fukushima hurt it, it's mixed, overall still going forward.
Okay, so where does the United States fit in here with their active nuclear power plants?
Today, as of right now, nuclear power source provides a fifth, 20% of all electricity in our country, 2/3 of our clean, carbon-free electricity. And like with Sweden, nobody's died except in occasional industrial accidents, which are unrelated to the nuclear power source, and almost no carbon has been emitted. So since its introduction, hundreds of thousands of lives have been saved by nuclear power plants doing 20% of our energy in this country. That's my position.
How many reactors do we have in the United States, and what's their record?
We got about 100 nuclear power plants are scattered throughout our country, cleanly providing power around the clock without oil spills, train crashes, gas explosions, or coal mine disasters, lethal air pollution, and all the rest of the crap. But, I come back to something I was saying about Germany. I forgot to say this earlier. Regrettably and presently, Germany is phasing out its remaining nuclear power plants for the next few years. So, and I did say, in Japan, I'm going to be honest, I do want to check. I'm not sure if they're going forward or not with new ones. So Japan's mixed. I keep coming back to Germany and Japan. They really, I think, flubbed it in handling Fukushima. They should have gone forward. So.
Okay, yeah. So it's not reflective of the rest of the world, but those two
Correct.
countries in particular.
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel somewhat convinced that we should explore this more, but I have this lingering fear in the back of my mind revolving around waste.
Okay, radio waste is the mother load, right up there with meltdowns, but the quantities of waste are so much smaller than waste generated by other fuel-using power sources like coal, gas, and they're easily managed. Jamie.
Can you give me an example?
Okay. All right. For the electricity used by an American in your entire lifetime, if generated by coal alone, the coal waste would weigh about 136,000 pounds. That's if you just use coal. If generated entirely by nuclear power, the lifetime of electricity for an American would produce waste weighing 2 pounds you could fit in a soda can, only a trace of which would be long-lived waste radioactive. Okay.
As long as I'm okay with growing more eyeballs on my big forehead up here.
Okay, that is the view of radioactive waste. That's a false view, okay? We all emit radiation. Radiation we're surrounded by. I want to be clear about that. Most radiation in nuclear waste decays quickly, becomes safe over the years, and right now, current interim storage methods of nuclear waste are overall safe, relatively inexpensive, and practical for over 100 years. I'll give you an example. Sweden, coming back to Sweden again. Sweden keeps waste, they keep it isolated for 500 years. The gold primary facility stores it in rock vaults, concrete silo, 150 feet underground, and all this is paid for by the nuclear power plant. So storage is pretty good. Sweden, I'm using an example.
I like using Sweden as an example. They're always ahead of everything.
I know they are.
They're so small.
Okay, I'm going with another small country because the only one I can think of on top of my head. That's Finland. Finland's adopted Sweden's method. It is Sweden's method. And then the first country in the world to begin construction on its repository for long-lived nuclear waste. And the facility is close to one of Finland's nuclear power stations. And it's scheduled to begin the storing of nuclear waste this year and should be in full operation and should run for 100 years until full.
Wow.
Take 100 years to fill it. So Finland, close to Sweden, but that's the only one I can think of. So it's safe.
How safe is safe? Just one.
Oh man. Okay. How safe is safe? Okay. The safety studies show they have estimated the effects if the repository in question were to fail and leak in Finland. In the most pessimistic scenario, the copper canister is already damaged before being buried, and the clay disappears in 1,000 years, both of which are extremely unlikely. And a person then lives his or her entire life on the most contaminated square meter of soil, eating and drinking only food and water from that same square meter. In that scenario, so pessimistic, highly unlikely, the person will receive an annual radiation equal to a bunch of bananas, scientifically called 0.00818 MSV. MSV.
Can you explain MSV?
MSV, millisievert. It's defined. Let me define. The average accumulated background radiation dose to an individual for 1 year, exclusive of radon in the U.S. 1 MSV is the dose produced by exposure to 1 milligram mg of radiation. So, but keep in mind, we all emit radiation.
And how much?
The average MSV of a human body in Japan, because that's where that study came from, God, it's Japan, I'm switching from US, the country with the most centenarians, old people, and they have accumulated the most radiation, we all accumulate radiation as we die, is 5 MSV per year. But these exposures, okay, vary greatly with health conditions. So I'm coming back again just to show you radiation's everywhere, and we can accumulate as we get older. So,
oh wow, okay. But it's the long-term effects, right? We don't have a lot of study on that.
All right, yeah, granted, in the Finland failures study scenario illustrates a key point. Many people worry about long-term storage of nuclear waste as though any amount of radiation, any contamination of the environment be catastrophic. And I feel like the renewables lobbyists focus on that. 1 molecule of nuclear radiation means we shouldn't do any nuclear. You know, the environment's already filled with radiation. Small amounts of contamination over the world is not a big deal. I repeat, it's not an environmental big deal. And zero is a ridiculous goal.
So I should stop trying to have zero risk.
It's asinine to have a zero risk policy. It is. Zero risk is not necessary. Well, look, we're done if we go zero risk, Jamie. You're an entrepreneur. You have a business. You can't do that. Radiation levels decrease, unlike toxic elements in waste from coal or from batteries, electric batteries, and solar panels for that matter, which last essentially and then will surely spread in the environment over time. No one talks about that, but in one molecule of nuclear and everyone's having a fit. It's not fair.
So I'm overreacting a little bit on the long term.
You're overreacting a hell of a lot and part of a massive neurosis that's global, and given what's at stake, you're crazy. The real danger is we freak out over the possibility of a tiny leak of radiation many years in the future, like Japan and Germany, shut down the nuclear power industry because we can't preclude the mere possibility at reasonable cost, and then go on burning fossil fuels, especially dirty coal, which is pervasive in China. They have the dirtiest coal, the worst coal, who in all probability will be the leading user of electricity in the coming century. So we got to get ahead of this now. Yeah, now is the time.
I understand, but in my defense, radiation poisoning seems a little scarier than bumping my head on a solar panel. Looking forward, though, is the United States good at dealing with
nuclear waste is readily managed because the volumes are so small. The entire volume of spent fuel from 50 years of American nuclear power, a source that produces 1/5 of your electricity, which I already said, could be packed into one football stadium piled 20 feet high.
Hopefully like the Brown Stadium this year, because there won't be any fans there. But do you have an example of where we've excelled at storing nuclear waste?
It's our military. They did a good job here. The U.S. military has nuclear waste disposed of from its nuclear weapons, atom bombs, and ship propulsion, nuclear sub programs. And it built a deep underground repository for nuclear waste in New Mexico and operated successfully for decades, admittedly with one serious accident in 2014, and it did trigger an expensive cleanup. But I want to be real clear. No humans were harmed, no human health, and it didn't harm the environment, okay? So.
But you're not dealing with this other problem that at some point we run out of the uranium, right? And isn't that why it's better to focus on the renewables?
Yeah, and I keep arguing nuclear is pretty much renewable, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about that. I do believe that. Look, first off, I'm arguing nuclear is pretty much renewable. And given the toxicity from batteries and wind energy, nuclear is qualitatively more renewable than wind.
It could be with technology.
Yeah, and the Russians are already doing it, Jamie, in the Ural Mountains. You know, 4th generation reactors in Russia are probably, we don't know for sure, using thorium instead of uranium.
What's thorium?
Okay, thorium is what it sounds like. It's Thor. It's a Nordic god of thunder, and thorium is named after him. Thorium's a naturally occurring element, and it's estimated to be about 3 times more abundant than uranium. Going against your argument that we're going to run out of uranium, we go to thorium, which is probably already being used by the Russians in 4th generation reactors in the Ural Mountains. Right now, thorium, it's commonly found in monazite sands, rare earth metals containing phosphate minerals. So I'm going to argue it again against everyone that nuclear power is practically a renewable energy source.
Okay, well, all right. I like to see that. I also have this. I mean, I can't get past the waste situation. I mean, you're telling me that every third world country is going to have access to the power, and I'm in favor of that. I love that. They all have their Beats headphones and all that. And so that means that all this waste, right? We have to store the waste, and the waste lasts like much longer than we do. What 100,000 years? Like, what are we gonna do?
Okay, look, we developed our nuclear reactors in the 50s. We use only a small amount of the energy in their fuel. But a range of advanced reactor designs can burn waste as fuel. Many of them are at least a decade or 2 away from commercialization, I admit that. But by 2050, likely before, these reactors will be using waste as fuel. And the Russians might be doing it now with the 4th generation reactors in the Ural Mountains.
I love that idea.
We need to steal from the Russians for once. We got to steal the technology from them.
I like that idea. Like those cars that run on the oil from the fast food joints.
Exactly. The same principle. Given how much energy we're going to need in the future, Jamie, the reality of fossil fuels they're finite. We got to be reprocessing and reusing waste as fuel. So I'm kind of conceding your argument there. We need to have something.
Well, what do we do until then?
We store it. It's going to be fuel one day. Let's have a little faith here. Walk by faith. The proposed U.S. waste facility in the Yucca Mountains has been controversial. Dispute, it's ridiculous. Most countries have moved forward with uncontroversial waste storage facilities. We need to do the same. And one day soon, this waste will be used as fuel. And I think the Russians might be doing it. They're on the verge of doing it. They're Ural Mountains right now. And so walk by faith, buddy. Walk by faith on this one.
When you did your initial cost analysis, did you consider the cost of storing all this?
Yes, the storage in Sweden and Finland, that's part of the cost. That's part of the operational cost. And it is everywhere. So that, yes, is the answer.
Like, at this point, it's indefinitely being stored.
Yes. So, for us, we developed a bunch of designs in the 60s. Following our Navy's lead, the commercial sector settled on light water reactors, and there was little demand for newer, better designs. But today, it's become crystal clear. Some of these alternative designs are much more resistant to meltdowns, and they're modular. In other words, cheaper to build, like modular houses. You can build a bunch of them systemically. Big advances in material science, nuclear engineering, modularization, making it cheaper. It makes it a lot more feasible to commercialize these new designs now. And yet again here, China and India are pushing the hardest and fastest for this stuff. They've got large teams of engineers developing thorium, metal-fueled, and salt-cooled reactors. So they're ahead of the game here. We're behind as usual.
Isn't it true that there are reactors that just can't melt down?
Okay, I'm going to say this. A lot of new reactor design features, they have fuels that stop reacting when temperature rise too high. Also, fuel clouding, the outer layer of the fuel rods can't melt, and the coolants that cool the reactor with no human or mechanical intervention. Even if there's a total loss of power like a Fukushima, these features make meltdowns and serious accidents virtually impossible. So I'm going to say essentially yes to your question, virtually impossible.
I just realized the death nail in this whole thing. You're going to put 100 plus targets all over the United States from terrorists.
Well, okay, that is a common perception. Let me be real clear here. Nuclear power plants are not good targets for terrorists.
Why?
The plant's got security extensive parameters. They're built to withstand.
I would hit those first if I were them.
Well, come on. They could take the impact from a large plane class. It would be 9/11 factor, a large explosion. They're hard to infiltrate. You're going to have to escape undetected. You need a lot of high-end equipment.
So we have a lot of security surrounding those?
A lot of security, and look how many times this has happened. It hasn't. Look, it's taken decades and billions of dollars for countries like India, Pakistan, North Korea, Iran to build a single atom bomb, whether Iran has one or not. We won't argue that. But the prospect that you're alluding to of a non-state actor, a bunch of terrorists, somehow marshaling the technical and financial resource to do what these countries are doing or have tried to do and taken many decades and billions of dollars to do is beyond, not just, it's ridiculous. It's highly unlikely.
I'm worried about normalizing the power, and all these countries say that they're building power plants for the economy, and really they're building bombs.
Okay, there's no relationship between the global expansion of nuclear energy and nuclear weapon proliferation. No nation, to be clear, has ever developed a weapon by first developing nuclear energy. To the degree that there's been a progression from one, it's to the other. It's always been the opposite, with nations first developing nuclear weapons and then nuclear energy. So I want to be clear about that.
I want to see how you feel after Israel is destroyed.
Yes, well, Iran is one of those countries. They're not terrorists, not like the way you said. I mean, it is a state, so it's a little different than you initially started out with your critique of nuclear, but it's a fair point, and so.
Or North Korea.
Okay, fair. All right.
I mean, they already have some.
While, that may be an intention. Nations that claim to be developing nuclear energy capabilities, when they're in fact attempting to develop a nuclear weapon, it's been virtually transparent and easily proven that they're doing just that. And we have proven that with North Korea and Iran. So they haven't gotten away with anything. We're aware of what they're trying to do, whether or not this is another matter.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
So, and also, by international law, nuclear energy facilities got to be open to international inspection. The International Atomic Energy Agency has an extensive monitoring and inspection network, and it's not difficult, believe me, to distinguish a nuclear weapon program from an energy program. So I want you to be aware of that.
Obviously, as long as what you're saying is true about the nuclear bomb and the nuclear power being so different from each other, I feel like, and you're saying the cost and all that, I feel like I could get on board and maybe go nuclear on nuclear.
I mean, Jamie, if we don't, given the issues we brought up, here's my big argument. Under the current technologies, we don't have another option. And if we don't dive in now with federal funding, federal help, and get the private and public sector to work together and get ahead of China, India, and Russia on these issues, it's not going to be good for us as a country or a planet.
Well, I appreciate you answering my questions.
You're welcome, Jamie. Thank you. This is Amir Phillips, American Pragmatist. It is sadly ironic that the left has been as detrimental to pragmatically solving a greener future as the right. Of all people, Greenpeace has been counterproductive to a greener earth when it comes to nuclear energy usage. This is par for the course, though, for the ecological holier-than-thou crowd. All too often, they pick a product or behavior they don't like and emphasize every possible downside while ignoring benefits, trade-offs, and most importantly, the implications of their own logic. And yet, this carbon-free energy source, nuclear power, it's being decommissioned in first world nations at an alarming rate. We're going backwards, not forwards. Worse still, for example, it's being replaced in Germany, of all places, with lignite coal power plants, which is the filthiest type of coal on planet Earth. By the way, this is also the type of coal China most uses. Simply put, every nuclear gigawatt closed down means, in reality, a fossil gigawatt continues to burn. Beyond just distracting from solutions that add up, the 100% renewables idea has been used repeatedly as a rationale, a basis to shut down wrongfully existing zero-carbon nuclear power plants with the ludicrous idea that they can be replaced with renewables 100%. It's false. But as we build out renewables, we absolutely must use them to replace fossil fuels, not carbon-free nuclear power. After the last fossil power plant closes and we have only nuclear power plants and renewables, then we could talk about whether to replace the nuclear power capacity with renewables if and only if it proves practical and beneficial. Let's wait and see. We'll deal with that problem then. Let's keep our attention focused on what needs to be done now in the next 10 to 20 years, because we have to rapidly decarbonize the world and not fall into the horrible delusion that renewables is the only or even primary solution. Simply put, for just $2 trillion, we could build 2,000 nuclear power plants sufficiently modernized, safe, and hopefully efficient to take a massive step to reaching our carbon emission goals, even if the global use of electricity, as we think it will, double or triple within the next 20 or 30 years, we'll still survive. We spent more in Iraq. Did we leave the place better off? We spent that amount of money. This option makes the entire planet better off. So as you can see, there really is a pragmatic solution to this pressing global issue. We got to keep the big picture in front of us always. If we really want to address climate change, we'll do so by focusing on a future of abundance, not scarcity. Not scarcity. The abundance will bestow plenty of luxuries I look forward to enjoying, as well as some frivolities I can't imagine because the tech is not here yet, but it will be. Have faith. Keep in mind a future of expanded abundance is not at all guaranteed, and we're not going to get there without, its own problems, trade-offs, and inequities. There will be some injustice, but ultimately, the real danger lies in not indulging in frivolity or leisure in ways that some find repugnant or wasteful. The greatest danger lies in our attempting to redress our environmental challenges by restricting fun, human activity, and ingenuity at every turn. You heard it here on Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist. This has been Emir Phillips, American Pragmatist. If you like the show, please hit like or subscribe. Also, it would be awesome if you went to the website, americanpragma.com. Any support there is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.